for having me.
Yeah. So before we get into the book, which I have sitting right here, and I'll go ahead and tell you I have not finished yet. So I'm in the process. But before we get to the book, the 2018 the feature story that you did in the post, just how did that come about? Like I know you're what kind of a enterprise guy, so you're not necessarily tied to DC in that area, but how did you learn about that area, and how did that story kind of come about for you?
Yeah, so a couple years earlier, I guess it was 2015 or 2016, just one Saturday night, I was lying in bed and looked at Twitter and saw that there was a shooting in the Lower Garden District, and that wound up being when Will Smith, the former Saints player, had been shot and killed. His wife had also been wounded, um, and my sports editor at the time, the next day, dispatched me to go to New Orleans and write about this horrific event and sort of what it meant for the city, things like that. I've always been really fascinated by New Orleans. I mean, not just kind of the fun parts, the Bourbon Street, Frenchman Street stuff. Like I like that stuff. The food is amazing, obviously. Um, but it's just like a weird, different, unique place. Like there's not another city like it in our country. Like I think it's our most European city, but also our most American city. Which probably doesn't make any sense, but like that just became like a one-off story. But like in the reporting of it, I learned that kind of stuff just happens there. Like it doesn't matter who you are. You could be famous, wealthy, well educated, doesn't matter. Like people just get shot in New Orleans and people move on with their lives. And that struck me as crazy. And it was just like a phenomenon that I wanted to revisit. So a couple of years after that, like I had stayed in contact with a couple of folks that I met during that initial story, Jeff Asher, the crime analyst, who became a friend and helped me with the book. Um, like he was helpful in illustrating to me just like how common this is and also like how rarely these killings get solved. I mean, like there's almost never closure. And the Post had a project that I wasn't involved in, kind of around the same time about just like, hey, like there are certain places in certain cities where like you can kill people and probably get away with it. And New Orleans was one of the highest rates of this, where like I think it was something like a third of homicides result in a conviction, which is absurdly low. And so just a couple years later, 2018, I was just sitting at my desk in the office, minding my own business, when an editor friend of mine who's also, in love with New Orleans, just like me, sent me an email about a story that had been written in I guess it was the Times Picayune, um, about Bryce Brown. Two kids had been killed right outside car during a basketball game. And the mayor came over the next day, the chief of police. I may be messing this up, but like a pastor, and everybody just sort of like said the same things to the cameras. It was just like, hey, like this is New Orleans. This is not who we are. This doesn't happen here. Then I remember Bryce was interviewed in the same piece, and he was just like, you know what? We have to be honest about this. Like if we're dealing with kids, pretending like this isn't a problem and a threat to these young people is doing them a further disservice. And I guess like for me reading that, part of what is intriguing and fun about New Orleans is like nothing is real. Like when you go there, you can be and do kind of whatever you want. And
Yeah.
like it has a very short memory. And like obviously its tourism revenue is tied to that. Like you can go down there, raise hell and leave. And for the most part,
Yeah.
nobody cares.
Right.
But the people who live there, it's different. And like they have to live inside this facade that I'm sure is tiresome. And for somebody like Bryce Brown and for educators and people who work in, lower level city government, like I came to see like a fatigue of trying to keep up this facade on something that doesn't really help them. Like they don't get those revenue dollars. But I just remember feeling like, okay, here's the first person I've met before I even met him who's being dead honest about this problem and is willing to say it out loud. And I called him the next day, like after reading that story, and I was like, hey, I want to come down there and see how you do this. This is refreshingly honest, despite not being that profound. And he was like, yeah, come see what we do. And I was blown away by the people who he let me talk to, players. Uh, there was no topic off limits. Like usually when you do this kind of thing, it's like, hey, like I'd rather you not talk about whatever. It was like, no, like within 5 minutes, Ronnie Jackson was telling me about how old he was when he broke into a house for the first time. He was like 8. And nobody came rushing in to stop the conversation. It was just like, this is real life around here, man.
Yeah. So how did like after that story runs, like at what point were you like this could be a book, and like how did that process kind of evolve? Did you approach them like, hey, I've got this idea, or I don't know, how did that kind of evolve?
I mean, I was fired up about the story, and like I was proud of how it turned out and the
Mm-hmm.
honesty
Yeah.
that I and we were able to achieve in it. But like honestly, like for the most part, like I didn't think it was anything beyond a story. Now, in my
Yeah.
notebook, while I was standing on the sideline, sometimes I just write little notes to myself. And one of the notes I wrote down was, this could be a book.
Yeah.
And, but like you go home, the story publishes, and you kind of forget about it. Well, I remember I was sitting at a brewery in Maine where I used to have family. Um, I was there with some friends, and I got an email from my now agent saying like, "Hey, love the story. I think this could be something more." Um, and he and I just got to talking, and I'm weird. Like I've written 2 books. I never think that like a story could or should turn into a book. Like books are hard. I mean, like this, I've
Yep.
written 2.5 of them, and I say half because I'm ghostwriting one now. Um, and man, it's just like the enormity of this thing, like, is just something that like I would rather just like not think about. Um, so with my first book, Not a Game, about Allen Iverson, like I said no for like 3 months. Like I don't really read sports books, which I know is odd, but it's just not my thing. Um, but eventually, obviously, I came around and said yes. And Across the River wound up being much more kind of what I'm into. Like, I really love this intersection of sports and culture and people and real stories. Um, and also, football happens to be my favorite sport. So, um, it didn't take me quite 3 months to get on board with this one. It was quite a bit quicker. And then, we just began sort of hammering out what would become a proposal and like who the cast of characters would be, what are we trying to say, things like that. Um, and I had to get buy-in from Bryce and the coaches and the school. And almost from the jump, I mean, he was excited about it and just sort of wanted to. I mean, he probably didn't have a full understanding of like what it was going to involve and like how much I would be there and like how bothersome I would be. And I'm pretty clear-eyed on like I'm going to be a pain in the ass. Like you're not going to
Yeah.
want to talk to me,
Yeah.
but if you engage launch sequence on this thing, like this is what you're getting into. So I mean, obviously, like I don't think he understood like kind of the breadth of that, but like he found out pretty quick, like once I started it.
Yeah. So what did, because like I know you've mentioned in this, like, you're flying from from DC to New Orleans, what was it, is like 19 times or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like what all I'm curious, like just that process, like how you managed in those 19 times to get what you needed, to see the people you needed to see, really just that, the interviewing, the researching, to go into games and practices. How did you kind of work that out to where you were able to get everything you needed?
Yeah. For the most part, my plan was to just be there for the big games. So like I was not able to be there every week.
Mhm.
They played what 11, 12 games, including the playoffs. Um, there were certain things I knew I needed to get, and so
Yeah.
I did quite a bit of pre-reporting. Like I went
Mhm.
in May of that year, just sort of like introduce myself around to some of the assistant coaches and try to figure out like who I might want to zero in on as quote unquote characters. The big thing wound up me being at their training camp. So like I get into that in the first chapter.
Yep.
They go off campus to Thibodaux, Louisiana, which is about an hour away. It's in the middle of nothing. I mean, it's like a small city, I guess, and they stay on the campus of Nicholls State. It's like this very intense thing. They practice, they meet well into the night. It's a big part of the, kind of introduction of these people in the book.
Yeah.
Um, and just from there, I just having a ton of conversations, figuring out like who spoke up, who didn't, I knew that there were going to be trends and patterns that I would start to notice. And this became like, it was 3 or 4 days of me just like in a super intensive training camp for myself on like, okay, who's going to be interesting here? So I like very informally formed like almost like a candidates list, who might be, kind of my main character. And it was at that training camp, that Bryce let me know that Joe Thomas, he was like, he's your guy. Like, for somebody who's like kind of the ultimate success story in progress, assuming he can keep this stuff together, Joe is your guy. Like his mom was in jail. He had been living on his own, kind of in secret, and I learned during that training camp was he had just gotten an eviction notice, and he was into it. Sweetest person I've ever met, probably. And just from there, it was just like, okay, who else do I want to focus on? So gradually, like as the season started, I started tying this stuff to games. Like, okay, like I knew that season opening game was a big one against John Curtis because that's like a predominantly white school. Um, there was another 1 week stretch with 2 games, so I stayed that whole week and just went to practice every day, talked to guys every day. Um, and like when I started noticing those trends, I generally would just like pull whoever, Fat, Leonard, aside and just like a lot of this, it was just like, can we have a conversation in which we vibe or whatever? Like, does this person trust me? Can they trust me? To open up. And, so in those opening weeks, I was able to sort of see these like caricature characters that like I wanted to explore. Like Joe was going to be our protagonist. Fat was going to be kind of the diva, but who's immature. Leonard was going to be the quarterback who isn't great, but man, if he can just like get out of his own way, like he could be successful. And Leonte wound up being kind of this like mirror of like what can happen here. And he was wearing the number of Tonka George, Tonka, who was the quarterback who got murdered a few years earlier. And so I just like saw them as these kind of exploration paths, I guess. And so I wanted to like get as deep into their lives as I could. Um, and one of the funny stories, it wasn't funny at all at the time, was one of the games. So like, let me back up. The shortest version of the answer to this is my wife and I had a 2-year-old daughter at the time. She's 7 now, but like she was young and like I would probably be divorced now if I was just like, hey, I'm moving to New Orleans. Good luck with Lila. Good luck with having a 2-year-old all by yourself.
Yeah.
It wasn't feasible for the whole family to relocate there. So, my plan and sort of selling this in household politics was, I'm just going to go back and forth, like I'll
Yep.
go when I need to go. And that tends to be the agreement my wife and I have. Like my job with the Post is unusual. I kind of travel as I need to, and like the covenant that I make is like I've got this like incredible job, but like I will only be gone. We now have 2 daughters. Like I'll only be gone as long as I need to be, and it's like kind of a
Yeah.
trust thing. And that was the way it was with this book. So one of the times I was sitting here with my wife, we had just gotten our daughter down, and we were watching TV. One of the games that Chris DiGiovanni, Chris D, he had kind of gone through the schedule and was like, you can skip this game and this game and this game. Like, we're going to crush them. Like, it's going to be boring, whatever. I don't know how far you into the book, but there's a chapter that begins with an on-field altercation, and there's a young woman who runs onto the field. It's kind of like the plot pivot point of the whole book, and
Yeah.
like Chris texted me that night. I was sitting here in the same room, and he was just like, "Hey, somebody just pulled a gun on a bunch of our players," and I'm like, "Whoa, what?" And like, I mean, I'm like pacing I was like, shit, I'm writing a book about gun violence, and this like crazy, frightening, incredible thing just happened. Nobody was hurt. Um, and like, I wasn't there to see it. And I like spent the whole night beating myself up, and I was like looking at flights, like, can I get there tonight? Can I get there first thing tomorrow? And I wound up going, it was either the next day or the day after, because I wanted to be there when the kids all came back. And it was this like super scary thing. One kid got um not expelled, but he was like asked to leave school. He was like involved in something that, I guess like put other kids in danger. He had just sort of gotten like tangled up in the wrong thing. So that was one where I was like, okay, well, I can like take my weekend and chill and hang out with the family. And then I didn't miss many games after that. I was just like, I just don't know if I can live with myself if I don't give myself a chance here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, like, how quickly, like I'm curious. Like one of the chapters I just read, I'm looking down so I don't get the title of the chapter wrong. But like, I'm we'll get into this in a bit, but I'm looking at potentially doing something similar, and we'll get into whether that's a good idea, your thoughts on it, that kind of thing. But talking about going to the games and going to some of them versus all of them. The chapter titled "The Boy Who Played with Trucks." Okay, like like I said, I have not finished the book, but like I'm curious the games you did go to, how you decided, like for a game against John Curtis or a game against this team or that team, what you planned for that night. Like, did you go in with a certain plan? Because like that particular chapter has a lot about Tonka's mother, Rhonda, and like it made it seem like maybe you're sitting with her in the stands for the game. Maybe I don't know how that worked for you, but I'm curious. Like for each game, did you have something in mind? Like I'm going to be, standing with the team the whole time for this game, or I'm going to be sitting with this parent, or that kind of thing. What was your kind of viewpoint and decision making around each of those games?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the quick answer is like I was in a lot of places at once. Usually, like in particular, like early in the season, um, like a couple of the games, I needed to really like zone in on the football, and like like and this is a side story, but like when I was writing the book, like even after I had the first draft done of the manuscript, my editor and I were just like, there's not a whole lot of football in this football book. So like I had to go back and like retrace my steps. I mean, like you're writing about
Yeah,
a team that's trying to win its fourth straight state championship. And like at some point I had to describe why this team is good and figure out like what are they doing that's different. But in that case, in that specific example, um, I ran around a lot. Like that was, I think, the week that I was there the whole week. And I may be wrong about that. I don't remember which game it was. Was that John Curtis?
it's early in the book. I'm trying to let
It's
me flip. I'm
I
not gonna
think it
just
is.
okay.
Yeah, I think it is. Like I believe that was the first game of their season. I had spent that morning with Miss Rhonda. Like we had gone to the cemetery. It was like kind of a ritual with her.
Yeah,
That was a night in which they honored her son.
Yeah.
And I had learned weeks earlier, like at that training camp, that Leonte was going to get the jersey number 2, the honorary jersey number. Um, it like or 5. I mean, I'm sorry, and like he was going to get that number that night. There was going to be a ceremony, so I went to that game knowing that I needed to sort of zigzag between Rhonda and Leonte. I needed to be around them as much as I could. Now, the good news is once the game starts, I can only be but so close to a player. Like I can be on the sideline and kind of listen in, but like I can't be talking to them and
Right.
taking them away from the game. So I mean, I remember it being a busy day now that you mention it, but like I spent that morning riding around with Miss Rhonda, getting her story, um, or as much of the kind of contours as I could. Then I went back to the school. I mean, like the good thing was a lot of this is like geographically all close to each other. I think like she lives only like 5 or 10 minutes from the school. Um, Once I was back at the school, I was able to like I always rode to the games with Bryce. It was like him and like 2 other guys. And I was always in the truck with them going to the game. Usually coming home too, but always going to the game. Um, got there, just like kind of stayed at Leonte's hip through the pregame. Um, Thankfully, Rhonda and her granddaughter came down and were like, kind of yelling toward Leonte because by then they knew he was going to get the 5. And then once the game started and the ceremony was going on, I zipped back. I mean, this is a high school stadium, so thankfully they're not like huge. It'd be different if I was, at Lambeau Field or um,
Nice pull.
Bryant
I
Denny
love
Stadium. Yeah, yeah, of course. Like, and I've been there, and actually, like Lambeau is one of the more logistically challenging stadiums to get from the press box to the locker room. You really got to hustle. Anyway, so as soon as the game started, like I kind of like went and sat with Rhonda for like a quarter, and then I'd go back down to the field, and it's just kind of like back and forth. And I always wanted to like be on the field for halftime because that's when the coaches would teach me and the kids about like what was going on. Um, and then like I watched a little bit more. Like I knew that I like what happened in that game was not going to matter as much as the off field drama. So like I knew that win or lose, I would have to address it. But that wasn't like I could recreate that. I could learn about that later. What I couldn't do later was see these interactions, see these emotions, see like these things in real time. So like I had to really make that a priority. Um, and I remember I was extremely tired that night when I got back to my hotel.
Did you worry at all with zigzagging like that? Like you might miss something with one while being with the other?
Yeah, I mean, like you always do risk that, like, but you got to make a choice. And like I've been doing this a long time. Like I made my
Yeah.
peace a long time ago that I can't be in 2 places at once. And like you just try to be strategic. And like I knew that I wanted to be in the stands with Rhonda when they had the ceremony. Like I
Yeah.
knew I wanted to be like with her the first time Leonte carried or caught the football. I just I there were moments that I had like sketched out in my head that I was like, okay, this is going to bring this to life. So if I can get this or some version of this, it's going to help me put it on the page. Like I just need to see like these emotional scenes in some capacity to scratch kind of this narrative itch. Um, and yeah, I mean, like I remember I was sitting with Leonte as he was getting his uniform on, and I mean, a lot of the stuff like you can kind of color in later, a lot of the context and things like that. I mean, I take ridiculously thorough notes. I take a lot of pictures, like not for myself or to ever be published, but the human memory is not a very reliable narrator, as they say. And so like, I just like take my phone. I'm like, boom, 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 boom. I just take like a
Yeah.
ton of photos just so I can like remember kind of the painting of this in my head. Um, a lot of stuff I never use. I record a lot of things. Every interview I record, um, like I just like stuff that I will probably almost certainly never use. I write down or try to record in some capacity. Because just in case, and like once it's gone, a lot of that stuff you can never get back. Um, So yeah, I mean, like you do have to take some strategic risks and like being over here when maybe you should be over there. But in that case, luckily, um, like I like from Rhonda's seat in the bleachers to the field was 2 minutes, and like a little less if you hustle.
Yeah. That's something I was going to ask you too, because like I've gotten, like I've covered high school football for, oh gosh, probably close to 20 years now, which is crazy to say. Um, but when I've really gotten into not photography because I can't do it, but I've really gotten into like the video aspect on sidelines and juggling that with keeping in-game stats and stuff. But it helps me go back if I'm writing something longer. If you're doing a gamer, whatever, but like you've got that. That's 101, right? But if I'm going back to do something fuller that later in the season about a team or a particular guy, I've got video from certain stuff that I can look at and not just like, oh, this play, but stuff on the sidelines and interaction with the coach, that kind of thing. Kind of like what you're saying where you're painting that picture. I'm curious because I was going to ask you about that, how you kind of kept up with all these scenes so that you're able to describe these emotional type moments, to scratch that narrative itch as you mentioned. How quickly after like a particular game or whether it be a practice or whatever, are you actually going back and writing, like something that became that chapter? Like is it immediate? Is it a week? Is it like what was kind of your process? I'm sure it kind of ebbed and flowed at times.
Yeah, I didn't write until October of that year. Like I remember that
Okay.
specifically because like I knew, so this is in fall of 2019 that
Yeah.
I embedded with the team, and the first draft of the manuscript was due in March 2020. Like as we
That's a
know, in March,
lot of that's a lot of writing in a
yeah.
short amount of time.
So yeah, and like I knew like 100,000 words was going to be kind of my like over under that I was shooting for, um, and so I did the math. Like, what is if I like the way I am, like I reach a point of diminishing returns when I write. Like if I write
Yeah.
for too long,
Yep.
this starts to suck. I mean, like first
Yep.
drafts for me, like pretty much always suck. But like if I'm writing for more than like 2 or 3 hours at a clip, it's gonna suck even more. And like I'm gonna wind up having to spend more time like fixing it later. So also it's like just again, it's just like so overwhelming to think like I've got to write a whole chapter today.
Yeah.
Um, and so the way I did it was, and I do this with my post journalism as well. I shoot to write between 800 and 1,000 words a day. And I was just like, okay, like including weekends, if I do 800 to 1,000 words a day, I have to start on October 1st. Um, and I mean, by then, like I was 3 months removed from training camp and 2 months removed from um, those first games. Like I should have like a foundation, and then I could sort of like write live as I got a little closer. But also like then you're like figuring out where the story's going. Um, like I knew as it was happening, like okay, like this could be a moment. Like I could tell from hearing those guys that this like one game, if this happened in the playoffs, it's going to be a brawl. It's going to be just like a showdown. And they were like, man, I don't want to go up to Neville. Um, and I was like, well, shit, what's a Neville? Like, what, okay. And they were just like talking about that enough that I was just like, okay, well, now I'm intrigued.
Yep.
Anyway, so I mean, I write everything longhand, and like people make fun of me about that, but it's just like the way I learned, and it's just like the little
Mhm.
notebooks. I like the little ones that like I can stick in my back pocket because one of my reporting tricks is like if somebody's nervous, I like not like super dramatically, but like I make it seem that like I'm putting my notebook in my back pocket, so like they can feel comfortable to speak freely. And I've done that for years. I mean, covering the NFL, covering high schools, like regardless. Um, it just like weirdly helps people to open up and feel more comfortable
Sure.
if like you don't have a recorder in their face or like are writing down every word they say. Um, so I had 15 or 20 notebooks by the end of that season. I used the program Scrivener. For a long time, I was just using Word, but like Scrivener is for writing books. It's like $100. It's the best thing that like I've ever done as far as like just little secrets or whatever of an author. Jeff Passan told me about this when I was doing my first book.
Yeah.
He was doing his book on the arm, and it was just like, man, like you got to get Scrivener. And I'm like, well, what's the difference? He's like, just you gotta just like check it out. And like there are like places you can put notes, like you can outline your chapter. So I have like a folder for like things I think may become a chapter. And I put everything I think may
Yeah.
go in that chapter into a folder. It's just like super intuitive and it helps
Yeah.
me to be organized. And so like as I thought, like, okay, this could be a chapter or this could be a section in a chapter, I would
Mhm.
put that stuff into a folder just to try to stay organized, even if it was just like sketched out. Like I wouldn't write it necessarily, but I was like, okay, this could go here. And then like over time, you put enough stuff into enough folders that it starts to look like a chapter, and then it slowly starts to look like a book, and you can start to see kind of the arc of the whole thing. And I mean, it's more organized, I think, than I make it sound. like, but
I'm,
I would
I've
just
got
like,
I've got Scrivener now pulled up on my other screen, and I'm looking at this, and yeah, this looks awesome.
yeah, I mean, it's great, and like, I mean, I recommend it to everybody that I talk to about writing a book. I mean, like, and it's like so stupid because like yes, like there's like a million features that I will never use, but like one of my favorite things is like the font is just very like
Mm.
pleasing. And like I always
Yeah,
think like writing a
yeah,
book is writing anything is hard. And like if you can make it like a tiny bit easier, um, you know, like it, including the font, like as you're writing, it's very smooth. I mean, it's just like a great user experience. Um, I mean, like I use Scrivener almost every day. Like I promise they don't pay me or endorse me, but like they should.
they maybe should.
Um, yeah, and like but I mean, like it's yeah. I mean, it's just it's so helpful because like at least with my brain, I never know where anything is going to go until I do. And then when I do, when I realize like, oh man, like this could go here, I don't have to go like flipping through a notebook to find it. Like, did
Yeah,
somebody say this? Or like, did I see that? Like I've already like typed out like Leonte said this, or Miss Rhonda is like crying and jumping or whatever it was. You know, like I can like kind of put that stuff into a central file that I can revisit later. It's got a great search function. Like, so like if I think I remember somebody saying something, or if I'm like, hey, I was in Baton Rouge, you could just like search Baton Rouge or NOPD. I mean, just like whatever. So yeah, I mean, like I didn't mean for this to become a commercial for Scrivener, but it really is like an incredible hack. And
no,
like so
that's awesome.
and it like helped me to sort of organize that stuff in a way that I could revisit and eventually turn it to a book.
Yeah, now I wish I would have known about it sooner because like I say I'm finishing. Um I'm getting close to the finish line on the latest book that I'm doing. I'm at last count I was hovering around that I think 98,000 words or something like that, and I've got I don't know how many chapters left, but it'll probably end up in the 120 to 130,000 word range. Now, it's a book of it's a history book, just done in a much more narrative nonfiction as opposed to just straight like here's some historical facts for you, you know. But the way I've had to come up with kind of my own system because I didn't use a Scrivener. Like I've got folders upon folders upon folders where for a historical book, more than a ton of interviews, and I've got a lot of interviews, but I've got tons of newspapers.com clippings, right? And going through all those, doing searches for the things I needed to search for, keywords, places, people. Everybody's got a folder. Everybody's got a year next to their name. And then all of that has gone into, when I've outlined and that kind of thing, this is going in this section of the book. This is going here. And this book has not been written in order. I mean, you know, sometimes that happens. You know, I'm writing some stuff in part three that I kind of wrote in the heat of the moment because that's more of what's happening now. And then I've gone back and written part one that's, you know, focuses on 1933 to 1947 because that stuff's not changing. It's not going anywhere. But this looks like something that would help anybody, especially with taking on a really large book project for sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I mean, I just think like anything that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this thing's hard enough without like
Yeah.
being disorganized. I mean, like, and I've done it both ways. I mean, my like not a game which came out almost 10 years ago now. Like I literally just threw out within a couple weeks, the last couple weeks, the 4-inch binder that contained all of my notes and printouts and all this crap that like, and I like had the color dividers in it, based on whatever topic. And I mean, it is like almost is borderline embarrassing now, like how long it took me to find anything. And like I was
Yeah.
pretty well organized in that. So um I don't know. Like I do tend to, kind of romanticize and glorify sort of the longhand stuff. I read physical books
Mm-hmm.
mostly now and like still take handwritten notes.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just way easier.
Yeah. No, I get
And
it.
there are ways that to make it easier that yeah, same. I mean, I wish I had discovered it earlier, even though I discovered it early.
No, I get it too because like I still like people will look at you funny like just because I will use high school football like covering a lot of games like I don't use I don't use your typical stat sheet where you're just, you know, kind of filling in the blank, so to speak. I'm not charting the game. Like I just take a notebook, now a bigger notebook, not the back pocket one, so that I've got a little bit of margin. And then I'm literally writing down every play. Like it's not gonna be crazy. Like it'll be something like, you know, out on the left margin, the little small margin, I'll put 1-10-30, so first and 10 from the 30, and then I'll write, you know, two run for seven, you know, so number two
Yeah.
ran for seven, that kind of, you know, that kind of deal. But then I've got a lot more space to like on the sides where I'll put little, like you were talking about, like kind of little notes to myself, like, you know, whether it be a description of a hit or something a kid said after a play or some emotion from a moment in the game. Like, you know, we don't have a lot of press boxes for the press at the high school level, as you could imagine. That's for all, you know, buddies of the program and such. And people are like, "Don't you? Wouldn't you want to have a seat up there?" And I'm like, "No." Like even if every program I covered, every game I went to, if they said, "Here's your seat," I would say thanks, but no thanks. I want to be on the field, on the sideline. I want to be in the middle of it because that's where I'm gonna get my story. Like I don't want to be the one that after the game just has, you know, has a box score and could write the gamer from that and it be trash. Like I want to be capturing that emotion. I'm looking for a very particular scene from a game to lead with. Like I want it to be something that even if you went to the game and stayed for all four quarters, I'm giving you something that you didn't see while you were there.
Right. Yeah, no, and like it always confused me why. I mean, especially like covering high schools, which like tends it's actually my favorite level of football, and like I mean, at
Mm-hmm.
least it could cover. And I mean, I'm a football freak, and like I could watch it. My daughter just the other day was like she was ranking her seasons, and fall was number 4 because of how much football dad watches. And I'm just like, yeah, well, and like I made a joke about just like, look, if watching football and hanging out with my daughter, if I could only pick one, believe me, I would pick the right one, and I would see
Yeah.
you on the weekends or like see you during the week. Um, and but anyway, like I love being on the sideline of a football game. You smell things and hear
Mm-hmm.
things, and like just you got to move out of the way, or else you're gonna get kneecapped. And it's
Yep.
just I don't know, like it's thrilling and I don't know why anybody was sitting in the press box. Like I used to, I mean, covering the NFL, you have to sit in the press box. Like you can't see much, and like you really have to rely. It's almost like a crutch. Like
Yeah.
it teaches you to get lazy because you
Yep.
know that after the quarters you're getting a handout of all the stats and you'll get a play by play at the end, and you don't have to pay attention the way you do covering high school ball. And like
Yeah.
for me, I love being completely locked in, watching a game, watching the interactions on the sideline, trying to overhear, the urgency in a coach's voice or like see the fatigue in a defensive end, is like they have a big stop to make. You don't see all that stuff in the press box. Also, yes, like high school press boxes tend not to be great. And like the NFL and college football, like at the high level, like they try to like charm you with like food and fast Wi-Fi and stuff like that. But nah, like they can miss me with that stuff. I'd rather be on the field all day long.
Yeah. So what does obviously your book, I'm in Alabama. You wrote this book on a program in Louisiana. What does like yours obviously, I mean it's on the cover, life, death and football, like what does for you, what does a book about high school football and particularly in the South, what does it need to have?
Um, yeah, that's a damn good question. I think knowing the football intellect of a lot of readers, you have to tell you have to be right on like what you're explaining like on the field. Now, there's also the fact, as I learned doing this book, that a lot of sports fans and football fans don't know about much. They don't know as much about football as they think they do.
Never.
And I didn't either. I mean, like in
Same.
fairness, like I covered the NFL for 5 years, and I've said it 100 times. I learned more from this one season covering a high school football team in Louisiana than I did in 5 years covering the NFL because they let you watch film and
Yep.
be in on plan, or at least like they did with me. And like I was able to at least like learn kind of like not just cover two, but how to beat cover two. And this is a silly little dorky thing, and I wrote about this later, but um, when I was done with the book, I started playing Madden, and I basically like started running Carr's offense and using what they had taught me. It was Madden 19, and like all these like cover three beaters, cover two beaters, cover four has 1,000 beaters. But like I got up to I was ranked number 56 in the world, like on Madden 19, like playing online, and
What team
like I
what
sort
team
of
were
like
you what team were you playing as?
I always played with the Steelers because like I needed like a tough quarterback who like didn't get sacked easily. I needed a star wide receiver. They had Antonio Brown, and I needed a running back who could catch passes out of the backfield, and that's when they had Le'Veon Bell. Also, like it's from the secondary standpoint, I am less reliant on a pass rush than I am on a strong secondary. Like I need them to like hold man coverage as long as they possibly can. But yeah, like I mean, I was like taking notes on opponents because like I started getting like paired up with the same guys. And like yeah, I mean that's I got up to number 56 and I was like, okay, I'm retired now. But it's what it needs to have is it has to have like an authenticity because like no matter what those football fans know, what they feel is unquestioned. And I think you have to try as best you can to capture what it feels like to be at a football game in the South. And it's just like something that people who don't get it, like if you live in parts of California or I don't know, like I know all these like places has like a big football program, but like it's still not part of the culture. I'm from South Carolina. So like you grow up. I mean, for me, like I was in elementary school and people were like, "Are you Carolina or Clemson?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Well, I'm Carolina." And like it just becomes like part of your identity. And so
Mhm.
it's just something you can't really explain to people who don't get it. And like so the people who do, you have to be true to them and like you have to make them feel what you're feeling. And to the people who don't get it, you have to explain intellectually why people feel this way. Like, how is it like this like church of, like sweat and tears? Like, like it just gives you this incredible feeling that even if you're not playing, like it just like cannot be replicated. And then like when you understand the game, as I learned to, like it's even more impressive to me. Like it's this orchestra. And like I was talking to a class at Georgetown University last week, and some kid, like a student asked me, because I've written a lot about CTE, and a student asked me, like, how can you like, do you dislike football now because of how much you know about CTE? And I'm like, not because of CTE, but because of other things. Like I love football more than I ever have. Like I just have to like separate myself and these like other parts of my brain from thinking about that. Like it's like, I mean, football is a very addictive and potent drug. And so like I have accepted the fact that I am addicted to it. And the difference is I'm not going to tell you I'm going to quit anytime soon. Like I have accepted that I am a football junkie, and I'm not always proud of it, but man, I love it. And like I just love the feeling. I love like watching a game and like trying to figure out what they're going to do next. Um, and so like you can't talk down to people who don't know as much as you do, and you have to like tell people who think they know um what they really ought to know. So like I think that's, and like I don't know, like I, regardless of where you live, you have to bring these people on the sideline and in these jerseys and helmets to life. Like you have to talk about who they really are, I think, because like right now, like we as like a fan or whatever population have never felt more distant to the player population. And it doesn't have to be like that. At least like not always. And so like you have an incredible gift and opportunity, just like I did, to like make this about the people, the humans, and like they're not players, they're people. And like that's kind of the thing that I had to always remind myself of, like, this is not like if somebody is hurt or having a bad game or whatever, like it's lazy to just like criticize them without kind of knowing the context.
Yeah.
And even if the context doesn't like fully explain it or excuse it, at least and I think like you've done your sort of due diligence to figure out like, okay, like so and so had a shitty practice on Tuesday, and didn't really get better, so they only played the second half or whatever. And like at least like so I don't know, that's long-winded, but like I think like you have to know the football, not talk down to the football reader, but also like ignore the football part of it as much as you can, which is a convoluted answer for what I think is a complex assignment, which writing a book is and should be.
Yeah. Well, it's such a, like, I mean, it's a balancing act, right? I mean, trying to get all those things just right for yourself and for your reader. Let me tell you quickly a little bit about what I'm looking at. So there's a particular program here in Alabama that's really good. Let me give you a little background on this program. So the city I actually live in, back in the early 90s, was going to the school. They were going to create their own school system, right? They were fed up with the county school system type deal. They're going to raise taxes, and that money's going to create their own school system. Well, they passed the tax, and they do not create their own school system. But there is still a need due to growth and overcrowding. So they create instead a new high school and a new middle school a town over. And so then there's, they're redrawing lines, and these kids are going to go to this school now, and these are going to go here. The program I'm looking at covering is the place where that school was created. It ultimately opened in 1996. So this place is not old. This will be their 30th football season. But in the state of Alabama, there's only one school currently at any classification that has a higher win percentage than this school, and that's Hoover. If you don't live here,
Yeah,
but you've heard of Hoover.
yeah.
That school is the only one that has a higher win percentage. But I've covered this school forever. A long time ago, I covered them almost every week. You're a football junkie. Nico Collins, that's the Texans stud wide receiver. He played at this high school. Quentin Dial, that played a bit for the Packers and more for the 49ers, he played at this school. They've had dudes. And the crazy thing is they haven't been around. This is going to be the 30th season. They've won 4 state championships. They're at the second highest classification based on your enrollment. And it's like they're a town that doesn't really seem to change. Like that's, I mean, being a history and a nostalgia guy, that's kind of what I love about it. Like I've always struggled to define the word progress. That's just me. Like people will be like, we have to have progress, and I'm like, what does that mean? Does it mean more traffic? Does it mean more bricks? What does it mean? And not a lot changes there, and a lot of people stick around even though this particular town doesn't have like it's not like it's not like they're down on their luck. You get a lot of there's a wide range in the demographic there, which I like. So you're getting a lot of different kind of characters, a lot of different people. But when that school was created, they didn't have much. Their first football practices were in a parking lot, like because they didn't have a field. When they finally did get a field to save cost, another nearby school like gave them their bleachers. Like they just put the bleachers on an 18 wheeler and bust them across town and put them there, and they're still the ones there today. So they still didn't have their own, and so like this particular place, this city has really retained its, I guess to use a cliche, it's kind of small town atmosphere. It is very small, but it's densely populated because they don't have a lot of commercial business or that kind of thing. It's just a place. It's a bedroom community, and they've been so successful, and there's been a lot of things that have happened there. 2011 they had to forfeit 9 wins for using a kid who broke a transfer rule or something, and it kicked them out of the playoffs. They were going to win the state championship that year. There is zero doubt. And they appealed this thing all the way up to the Alabama Supreme Court, if you can believe it. It was the weirdest thing. Covered all of their 2014 season. Nico Collins was on that team. And I mean, that season was crazy in and of itself. You had a lot of intersection of community and the sport. A lot of bad things were happening in the city. They had a kid die during that season or during off-season workouts. I can't remember which one. Um, Heart issue, say kind of the same story you've heard in a lot of places, and they had a lot of businesses closed that year. And literally that year, you could feel Friday night was the escape. I mean, that's probably another cliche, but that was the night to forget about all the problems over here and see something positive happening in their community, and they won the state championship. I could have done a book about that 2014 team, but just that's some of the historical groundwork, and all of that would certainly play a part early. What I'm looking to do is follow them all season long. I've already got their schedule. Like nothing, like obviously it's nothing like what you would have had to do where I'm flying. Like they're a town over. I can get to the school in 15 minutes, and their schedule. They're not playing any crazy out of state game. Their region is pretty close by. Their furthest opponents are actually coming to them this year, and I'm just trying to figure out as I decide what to do, the angles, spending that time around them in the spring and in the summer, and kind of that character development and feeling out what angles are going to build going into the season. Kind of like you said, seeing where that story or the story of their season goes. I think I'm just missing that, like, there's not an obvious angle for me yet, an overarching theme, kind of like life, death, and football in an American city, right? There are certainly interesting things, but there's not that one theme that stands out above everything else that I haven't found it yet.
Oh, yeah, you have. It's that thing you said about progress and like one of my things is everything has a downside. Like everything is a sort of push and pull. Like so I don't know which town you're talking about, but
Clay,
like
Alabama.
well, like I've been to places in South Carolina that it's like I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, which is like a small city, and like I remember writing about just like how annoying it was that like the downtown would never change, and there's an argument to be made for tradition, just as there is an argument to be made for progress. Now, you can't have both. You can't have both at the same time. So I think that what you're describing in this community is a metaphor for the entire South. And it's this protection and tribalism that we're all very proud of and protective of, but we make fun of too, and it's just like, but like only we can make fun of it. It's like you can't beat up my brother, only I can. Uh and so like you can't talk shit about my house being messy, but I can.
Right.
And so like I have not been to Clay, Alabama, I don't believe. But like I've spent most of my life like in the South and like thinking about the South. And it's like football. Like people who don't get it, don't get it. And like you can't tell, like, I mean, I like when I'm traveling, like even if I'm in here in the greater DC area, like people are like, oh, the South, like it's like nothing but like problems. I'm just like, look, we have some things that we're not super proud of, but like
Yep.
also it's the closest we get to culture in this country.
Yep.
And the food's incredible, the people are nice, cost of living is low. So like there's no such thing as a place that's like settled or set. So if it were me, like I would use Clay and this like cathedral on Friday nights as a way to explore kind of the wider surroundings. And like you don't want to go crazy with it and like get into like kind
Sure.
of a like I just think like the question is what is this community doing about like what it's leaving behind and also where it's going. And the people who are still there sort of carrying this thing, whatever it is, how long are they going to be here? Like I think there's a way to sort of examine the progress of this as a wider angle into what people say about the South, what the South really is, what the South maybe should be. Um, Zoom in on Alabama itself. Where is Clay? Like where is it like a suburb of?
It's a suburb of Birmingham. It's
Okay.
kind of
Um,
northeast of the city.
I mean, there's no shortage of history like there, and
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
sure that like you've got people with like ancestors on either side of whatever, and that's how I would look at it. That's not for everybody. Like it's just like how I would do it. Um, and also like sort of ask yourself the question of like, is it really an escape? Like because it's the same thing. It's like I mean, this goes back to the everything has a downside
Mm.
theory. Like an escape is also a distraction. And like a distraction has a negative context, but an escape has a positive contact or a connotation. And, so like, is it a way to ignore our problems or is it a way to get a break from our problems? It
Yeah.
can be both.
Yeah.
But I just think like it's the exploration. Like a lot of the stuff that I write, I don't necessarily always try to answer a question. I sometimes just try to raise a question. So,
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're
And what?
talking about like Alabama is our most southern state to me. Like most like synonymous with the South. Football is the most southern and American of our sports. And like you've got like what sounds like an incredible place. Um, and now you just need like the people who characterize those things.
Right. Yeah, and that's you mentioned like a question. You're not always looking to answer a question, but maybe you're looking to raise one. One of the things I would be curious about is, I know a lot of people there. I'm good friends with the head coach who I've kind of floated this idea to him a few weeks back and have done some some legwork in one of those notebooks and he's great. He's any access you need, whole season, whatever you want, film, all the things, right? And he's been like that forever. That program has been like that for as long as I've ever covered it. But the question that comes to mind that I would like to really zero in on, and maybe I go looking for the answer to it, but is why so many people, even though this city, compared to a lot, if you're talking Progress and other cities that are nearby that you could choose to live in that are still affordable for you to live in, why do they come back? Why is the wide receiver from that 2011 team now coaching those wide receivers today? What about this place has kept him there when he's had other opportunities? Same question for the head coach, same question for the principal, for teachers, whoever. All these, these central characters, and recruiting at the high school level these days has become such a thing. Kids are putting out graphics that they're transferring to another high school, for God's sakes. Why are these kids? What is it about this place that is keeping them there when a lot around them isn't changing or isn't improving or isn't progressing, that kind of thing. I think where this really struck me, and I've always thought about this place as a book, but just in passing, like kind of like you mentioned when we started, when you wrote that article, I have a very similar story where you're like, oh, this could be a book, but oof, do I really want to take that on? And this was the 2023. They won the state championship again. They beat Saraland. This was Ryan Williams, who went crazy at Alabama as a freshman. He's playing for Saraland. Clay Chalkville has Jalen Mbakwe, who's now also at Alabama. And I covered that state championship, but my story didn't come out until the next day sometime. I wrote all night, and I wanted to really try to get at what does this one mean for community? What does this mean for legacy? That kind of thing. And this is going to be stupid. You work for the Washington Post. Don't grill me on my lead here, but here the way I led the story was I just put Clay is like my lead sentence was Clay is sticky. And I just said clay in its purest form is a sticky soil. How fitting is it then that this year's Class 6A state champion Clay Chalkville High School had so many contributors from the past that so many folks have stuck? And then, then just went into what all transpired, some game stuff, and then just what that place means to people.
Yeah, and like I think all that stuff is interesting, and like I think the concept of home is really. I mean, I think all of that stuff is worthwhile to explore because like humans are like sea turtles. We have this instinct to go back
Yeah.
to the beach on which we were hatched, and like it's unpopular to fight that instinct, and so that's something that's like universal, but also there's something about that community that is unique. So there's something it has in common with every other place. Like everybody wants, like, feels like they should go home. Some people do, some people don't. But there's also something that makes it unique. So if you can explore both of those things, like I think you could have something pretty special. Like if you're able to sort of get at that, because like it's something everybody experiences. Like you could be from the woods of Idaho, but like still like what home means, and like
Yeah.
what this like kind of push and pull is. So yeah, I mean I think like if you can figure out the big stuff, like those big themes, the little stuff will take care of itself.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I gotta figure out, man. It's that pulling the trigger, like saying I'm in, because when you know it better than I do. When you say I'm in for something like this, that commitment is large.
Yeah, yeah, it's one I don't take seriously, and I wish you the best of luck. That's I keep saying I'm not going to do it again, but I keep doing it again. So
Same,
um
same.
yeah.
I've thought here and there, like I'm gonna take a break for a while. Like I'm not even done with the manuscript of this other one. I mean, it's in the next month or so it'll be on to editing and all that. But uh, I can't get this one out of my head. So I figure if I'm gonna do it, I would rather do it now than wait and wonder what if, or give myself an
Yeah,
excuse that's not really an excuse.
yeah, I get that. Man, what you're describing sounds like you have kind of the outline of something. So like just that's more than a lot of people can say. So whether you choose to do it is your decision, but it sounds like the story could be worthwhile.
Sounds good. I appreciate you doing this, Kent.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Gary. It's good to talk to you. Sorry again about last week, but I'm glad we were able to do it today.
No, no, you're good. I really appreciate it. And where people can get your books everywhere, right? Across the rivers everywhere, right?
Just yeah, the usual suspects. I assume it's still on sale. I haven't looked in a while,
Yeah,
but yeah,
I know it
there you
is.
go. There you go. That's Leonte there on the front. All
Okay,
right, cool.
sure is
Thank you
cool.
very
Well,
much.
thank you. Appreciate you.
All right, good to talk to you. Bye bye.
All right, you too. Bye.